He began his architectural photography career in 1979, inspired by both classical and contemporary artists. Their principles of composition and artistic integrity have guided his work for his entire career. In 1991, he was awarded the Rome Prize by the American Academy and produced his first book for Rizzoli, Views of Rome. And that was the first of his now 17 books for the publisher. Please welcome Steven Brooke.
Hi, everybody, and thank you all for coming. I'd like to thank His Highness Sheikh Sultan bin Ahmed Al Qasimi for his support, and His Excellency Tarbi Saeed Ali, and the tireless and patient staff of Exposure 2022. I'm honored to be participating in this extraordinary event with this group of esteemed photographers, many of whose careers I have followed for years. As a child, I was mesmerized by the crystalline architecture depicted on the covers of the countless sci-fi books that I read. Those buildings conveyed such a positive, optimistic sense of the future. Those buildings embraced technology and embraced science. And those buildings, along with the magical first time I learned to draw in perspective, kindled my love of architecture and the fascinating ways in which it could be depicted. And that love has manifested in a 4-decade career that I still enjoy. In my classes at the University of Miami, my workshops, and in my YouTube videos, I've tried to bring my dedication to the art and science of architectural photography to as many people as possible. I've tried to systematize the study of this art and to share the basic principles that reflect its centuries-old tradition. My real hope for the profession of architectural photography is that the faithfulness of the architectural depiction will always match the precision of the design and engineering of our subjects. This field of architectural photography has its origins 600 years ago. It's a contemporary expression of an established art form, and the paradigms of composition, the handling of light and tone and color and density are over 500 years old. It is a disciplined, methodical, and mathematical system of composition and rendering. And there are artists on whose shoulders I stand who have set the tone for architectural depiction. They include, of course, Vermeer and deHooch and Canaletto and Piranesi. They also include modern masters like de Chirico, Cézanne, the American architect and illustrator Hugh Ferris, and Edward Hopper, who was, for me, a 20th century Vermeer. My goal was to systematize the principles of architectural depiction. And I've broken these down to discuss with you today into 5 basic categories. 1, horizontal and vertical alignment, proportional systems and rectangular armatures, the use of border verticals, basic shapes for architectural photography, and the last thing, processing for perfection. So first, foremost, vertical and horizontal alignment. This has a mind of its own, it seems. There's one principle, really, that separates professional architectural photography from everything else, and that is that the verticals are parallel to the picture plane. Not like the photograph on the left, more, of course, like the photograph on the right. And this is a tradition that is hundreds of years old. If you look at medieval and Renaissance paintings, architecture was primarily used as the backdrop, as a formal backdrop for events that take place. For example, this is a painting by Lorenzetti, 1332, and this is the scenes in the life of St. Nicholas. And already, these basic principles of architectural depiction are already being established. Two in particular, of course, that the verticals are parallel to the picture plane. And the other is that the horizontals are also parallel to the picture plane, creating basically an axial composition. This is a classic painting most people know about, Piero della Francesca's The Ideal City. And although this was not a backdrop for events, you can see that Piero, who by the way was not just a brilliant painter, he was also a mathematician, a geometer, an algebraicist, that he is using verticals parallel to the picture plane and axial composition. Now, the Reformation, post-Reformation, there was a change in artistic patronage. Before this time, the church was a primary patron for artists rendering architecture. But in the Reformation era and post-Reformation, it was no longer paintings for the church, but paintings of the church, of the cities, because the patrons were no longer clerical, they were commercial, they were the burgermeisters, they were the business people, and architecture itself was the subject. The people here, unlike the other ones, the people here are incidental. They're there for scale and to direct the eye. And again, axial compositions predominate. This is Jan Vermeer, who really personifies the golden age of Dutch painting and engraving. There are others. Well, here are Vermeer, deHooch, and deHooch Learning to Walk. And the interiors all feature this same compositional principle. Yes, the verticals are parallel to the picture plane, but a predominance of axial composition. Peter Sonderdam was known for his paintings of church interiors, and already he has something to offer us as architectural photographers. If you look at his painting, you see that the ceilings soar overhead, but the ground plane looks normal. And what he's done here, if you scale this painting, his eye height is about a half a meter off the ground. And the principle that he shows here has meaning for us because all things considered, the wider the lens that we use, the greater the chance for foreground distortion and the lower should be the camera angle. And here's a photograph of mine at Miami International Airport using basically this principle. The mind willingly accepts a ceiling soaring overhead, but doesn't like to see the ground plane drop out from under, which is a classic technique of horror film photographers. If they want to make you queasy, they will make the ground drop out. So if you were using a 17 millimeter or 24 millimeter lens up at this height, you're going to have distortion in the foreground. So for most of my views, when I have to use such a wide angle lens, I keep my camera as low as I possibly can. And I didn't invent that. That I learned from Peter Sonderdam. Now, the Vedutisti were engravers in the 18th and 19th century. They are really the forerunners of what we do as architectural photographers. Their primary work was architecture, interiors, and landscape, and they were usually associated with one city or region. What's interesting here is that unlike the painters who would do one painting and sell that one painting, the Vedutisti, the view painters, made plates and ran off prints just like we do. And what the importance here is that this work, these architectural aid memoirs for travelers on the Grand Tour, this was a way to distribute architectural artwork to a broad audience. Rome, Piranesi, Falda, and Vassi. In Venice, Canaletto, Bellotto, Francesco Guardi. In Holland, Berkheide, Peter deHooch, and of course, Johannes Vermeer. The question then is, what do all of these artists have in common with their work? And what they have in common is expressed by Luca Pacioli. Without mathematics, there is no art. And what they all use are some form of proportional system in conjunction with what are called rectangular armatures. And this was systematized in 1546 by Alberti, who created these systems of proportion based on the nodes of a vibrating string, using the octave, the fourth, and the fifth as divine numbers. And he felt that art in general, whether it's music or it's visual art, they had all of these things in common. And so he set up a series of proportions. The ones on the right were typically used in large-scale paintings or in frescoes. And if you know a fresco, you need to have things set up ahead of time because the wet plaster goes on and you need to paint quickly. You can't be deciding how your painting is going to look, where things should go while you're doing that. The plaster will dry out from under you. So he has these proportional systems. The ones on the left were used primarily for what are called easel paintings, and very much like the size of images that we do, particularly 2x3, 1x2, which are derived from Fibonacci series from golden section. Here's a good example. This is Titian's presentation of the Virgin in the temple. This is a 369 composition. And if you look at exactly where the principal subject falls, she falls on the 6 vertical and on the 6 horizontal. But what's also interesting is when this painting is subdivided so that you're looking at every ninth in this 369 composition, it determines where every major vertical falls. And when you connect from the corners to the point where the verticals hit the perimeter or the horizontals hit the perimeter, those rectangular armatures determine the sight lines and determine the perspective points. So this rule of thirds, 1x2 compositional scheme, they teach this in photography 101 classes. And if I have a simple composition like this little Tempietto that I photographed in Kentucky, I will maybe use this kind of a system. What I've done here, of course, is I haven't put the middle of this little Tempietto dead center. I've moved it over 1/3 to give dynamism to my image. The compositional scheme I use most often, also derived from Fibonacci, is a 2x3 compositional scheme. And I use that, for example, here in an off-axis composition where I'm looking at 2 main facades. And what I teach to my students is that you never put that corner of the building right in the middle, because what you do is you send your eye in 2 different directions. So the question is, if it can't be in the middle, where is it going to be? But a proportional system that I use, I will put the corner of the building, for example, in this one, 2/5 of the way in. I'll subdivide the bottom of the building to the sky in that same proportion. The edge of the building, 1/5 of the way in. And I will move my camera so that what I'm shooting falls into that proportion scheme that I see in front of me. Now, there's a second part to this that goes along with proportional systems, and that's what's called the armature of the rectangle. What that is basically is a way to subdivide the picture plane to give you lines of demarcation into which you can place your composition. It's very much like chord changes in a song, where the chord changes stay the same and you weave your melody around those chord changes. The chord changes stay the same. These armatures stay the same. This is a simple way to do it. You draw a line from corner to corner, another line from the corner perpendicular, and where they meet is where you start drawing your lines of your rectangular armature. If you look at, for example, Claude Lorraine's, these are sketches for paintings, you can see that he is setting up these rectangular armatures in his study for his paintings before he even goes to the actual painting. He is setting up these lines to give himself areas to work on, to help him to define where he's going to put his subject matter. So what I did, this is an American illustrator, Hugh Ferris, and I saw his drawings when I was younger, and these were some of the drawings that just absolutely hypnotized me. I loved how optimistic Hugh Ferris was about architecture. But a couple of things that you would ask, if he's got all these verticals, where does he place them? And we're going to talk about the vertical on the right, which is a dark vertical, which helps balance the perspective. And if you look at Hugh Ferris's drawing, 1/5 of the way in is where he puts his main vertical that's in shadow. And the corners, the edges of every other building all fall within this 2x3 framework. In addition, when you connect the places where the proportional system hits the frame and connect them up, you see how he's used those to establish the perspective of the light, of the shafts of light. So he's using both a proportional system and rectangular armatures to basically frame his entire image. Come now. Now, if you want to practice seeing proportional systems, Photoshop offers a very convenient way to do that. You can make grid guides in Photoshop under Edit, Preferences, Grids and Guides, and you can set the percentage any way you want. You can set it at 33 as ruled by thirds. You can do it at 20%, which is a 2x3 compositional scheme. And doing this ahead of time, you actually can teach yourself to see these proportional systems out in the field. Now, this is a case study when I photographed Philip Johnson's glass house. Now, this glass house, by the way, is the proportional systems in the glass house. He did this all under golden section proportion. And what I wanted to do with my photography is to make sure that my compositional schemes absolutely were in harmony with the building. And so I decided from the start I was going to use a 2x3 proportional system throughout my study of Philip Johnson's house. So here's a good example. This is the longer view. Every key vertical element in this photograph is determined by my 2x3 section. All the way, the corner of the building, the edge of the tree, the corner of the other building, the ground plane to the tree plane, that's 2/5 of the way. It's all done as precisely as I can, not just as an academic exercise, but to be in harmony with the architecture that I'm photographing. This is another one, this clear axial view, edge of the tree, top of the building, base of the building, corner of the building, all fall within this 2x3 compositional scheme. Same thing here. Now, 2/5 of the way in, that's where I put the corner of my building. Top of the roof line, 2/5 of the way down. What I've done here is there are two elements of this interior. One, there's a rectilinear section that's all to the left, and curvilinear, the sculpture, forget the fig tree, the sculpture and the fireplace. And what I've done is I've separated the rectilinear forms from the curvilinear forms. 2x3 compositional scheme, top of the table, 2/5 of the way up, corner of the room, 2/5 of the way in, edge of the fireplace, 1/5 of the way in. Again, an axial composition to keep everything orderly. Again, doing this to be in harmony with the building that I'm shooting. The next important aspect or element for architectural photography is something that we stole from classical landscape painting called repoussoir, the use of border verticals. What it does, it offsets the horizontals, it puts the viewer in the scene, and it's usually full height and often in shadow. If you look in the upper left-hand corner, this is Piranesi's view of the Corso. That's an incomplete engraving. And you'll see what happens, that your eye follows the line, the roof line, and just goes off the frame. What we want to do, what any artist wants to do, is to engage the viewer and keep the viewer looking at the image. This is not Piranesi's engraving. On the right is Piranesi's engraving, and you can see that this sharp perspective is balanced by this full height vertical on the left, which turns your eye back. And he even engraves the clouds to turn your eye back in this direction. So what he's done here with this vertical and the horizontal area here in shadow is he's made a frame within the frame to frame the architecture. Edward Hopper, early Sunday morning. The incomplete painting is at the top, and you can see what happens if you align the top of the fire hydrant, the top of the barber pole, the roof line. Your eye goes zipping off the page. But that's not the painting. What he does this, it's subtle, but it's brilliant. He uses a vertical in the upper right-hand corner to turn your eye back. And the other thing that he does on the left-hand side, upper corner, absent that vertical, he darkens the sky, which is a technique that portrait painters use. This is Frans Hals. In other words, they use this darkened corner to frame the image. And so he does the same thing here. A vertical on the right, darkened image on the left to keep your eye on the painting. And he does this a lot. When you have a human being, you being a human being, your eye naturally looks at other people in a painting, and if they're looking off frame, your eye will go in that same direction. But what he does here, he has a full height vertical on the left to turn you back. Same thing here, she's rolling down the side of this theater, but he puts a vertical here to stop your eye. And he also, in the painting up above, he has a full height vertical on the left, darkened foreground on the bottom to make that L shape. But he's doing something else here, and it's an emotional use of architectural elements. Clearly, these two are either not getting along or haven't been talking to one another. They certainly aren't here. He's busy reading his paper. She's over here, and there's nothing more boring than seeing somebody plunking one key on a piano. So he's using that door, the vertical full height, to separate his subjects. But the clever thing that he's done so that your eye doesn't follow her eye off frame, he's kept enough of the top of the piano to turn your eye back into the painting. De Chirico, who uses exaggerated perspectives, things that we might not do as architectural photographers, because like I said before, when you have something that wide and you have the bottom drop out from under you, it's sort of unpleasant. But what he does, even with his exaggerated perspective, does a couple of things. One, these are still on axis. There is an order to the painting coming from it being on axis. And he also puts a full height vertical in there to give additional stability. So he's got this rakish perspective and a full height vertical. The other thing that he does, he also uses this golden section proportioning. You notice the full height vertical is 1/5 of the way in. The other parts of the building, 3/5 of the way. Even the little windows sit within each one of these little squares generated by this 2x3 proportional system. The base of the sculpture. So this is a very, very organized painting, even though it has a very exaggerated perspective. You can use these verticals for a streetscape. You can use them they're very valuable for interiors if you're shooting an off-axis interior because they hold your eye on the frame. You can use them for landscape. This is John Constable, British landscape and painter of architecture. You can use them also to help frame your landscape. Now, there are common shapes in art and in art history. Very common is a pyramidal, which portrait photographers use all the time. Also, circular patterns. You see this in Arabic art forms all the time. This is a photomicrograph of mine that I constructed using that. And in teaching architectural photography, what I wanted to do, because I'm dealing with students who have never done this before, they're going out into the field trying to figure out how to render the architectural subject matter. And so what I've done, in keeping with this spirit, is I've broken down rendering of architectural subject matter into these 6 basic shapes. So let me go through these. 1, axial, horizontal is parallel to the picture plane, and symmetrical, where the building is dead center. And if you want to ennoble a building, you want to focus someone's attention on a single building, put it right in the middle. Here's Piranesi's Trevi Fountain, Accademia Britannica in Rome, and I did this on the interior of the New York Public Library in a book that I did on Carrere and Hastings. I also did this for these little cottages in Seaside, Florida. Seaside, Florida is a town in the Panhandle which was developed from scratch. I was fortunate enough to be the photographer of record literally from day one. But building these little cottages didn't go over well with the residents who are used to looking at clunky concrete buildings. And they said, you know, why are they building these little shacks? So I was using my photography to ennoble these little cottages. I put them on axis, dead center, best time of day I could find, to give them the same kind of strength I would if I were shooting a cathedral, if I were shooting a major building. I treated these exactly the same. The second is an axial, but where the building is off-center. And there's a reason for that. Here's Piranesi's view. His building is on axis, but off-center so that you could see the rest of what's going on. On the right, here's my view of a cottage, another cottage in Seaside, but I shifted it off-center to be able to see the other buildings around it. Here's a good example of why you would do that. This is Palmer Trinity Chapel. This is an axial symmetrical view. And if you look, your eye goes zipping right down the aisle, right to the back of the right to the platform. Here, I've made an axial asymmetrical composition. My eye starts on the left, moves to the right, the curves carry me around, now they're dropping down, now I finally get to the aisle, and I go all the way back to the platform. So this is a much more dynamic composition. Both of them work, both of them do different things. Axial, symmetrical, but with a vertical. Why? Because the axial asymmetrical can be unbalanced. And so here, I've done this here's Piranesi's view of the Pantheon, on axis, off center, but a vertical on the right. Here's my view of the Fortuna Virilis in Rome, same thing, on axis, off center, but I did include the tree to help balance the composition. Same thing here in this Keneal and Elliott building. I have an axial view, off center, and the tree is there to balance. The next shape is what we've looked at before, off axis, asymmetrical, 2 facades. Piranesi does this with the Arch of Septimius Severus. Here are the Portuando Parodi architects, and this is at Vizcaya, which is in the exhibition. These are two facades, off-axis, asymmetrical. And again, absent a vertical, I use my compositional scheme to give order to it. Now, this is a streetscape, the same as before, but with a vertical. Here's Piranesi again. He's got two facades showing, full height vertical. Stazioni in Rome, another one, a Portuando Parodi architects, 2 facades, off axis, asymmetrical, but a full height vertical to balance. And then the last is a classic streetscape where you have a one facade, off-axis, asymmetrical, and a full-height vertical. Canaletto does this. This is one of my views in Rome. And this is what went into that. There's a 5-minute window to take this picture. The sun is coming from, this is the north, coming from the east, but that building, the full height vertical, shields the sun from my lens. But it's late enough so that the shadows on the bottom are not on my building. This is a north elevation, so I'm here early in the morning in the summer. Also, Rome is all about volume, and the north elevation is lit. The west elevations that I'm looking at are not. So I get a nice chiaroscuro effect going from dark to light, dark to light, dark to light, which emphasizes the volume. Also, I'm here at about 5:30 in the morning, and by 5:45 the Romans are awake. By 6 o'clock the cars will take me out. So there's about a 5-minute window, and let me acknowledge that 5 minutes is an eternity compared to the split-second timing that I see in some of the wildlife photographers whose work is here. They're dealing in split seconds, and I am in awe of their strategic skills. 5 minutes is, again, an eternity compared to what they deal with. And then this can also be used for basic landscapes. This is a photograph that my son took in Ohio landscape. My son's a medical student, but he's grown up with photography. He's grown up, how could he not? I just inundate him with this stuff. And so when he goes out and actually does photography, he knows these little principles and uses them as well. So here are the 6 basic shapes, and I give these to my students and tell them when they're out and just standing around on a street corner, look at things and try to figure out which one of these would work for this building. What would you do for this streetscape? Practice seeing these shapes. Le Corbusier said, by establishing standards, we shall succeed in solving the problem of perfection. If you've seen the movie Amadeus, there's a point in the movie when Antonio Salieri, who's a so-so composer, he's very popular, but a mediocre composer, and he is given a chance to look at Mozart's portfolios. These are right out of his mind, original portfolios. And Salieri looks at these portfolios and he says, this is music that is finished as no music is ever finished. And that's what I want. Striving for compositional perfection. Digital photography gives us an opportunity to emulate the masters who have set the standards for architectural depiction. This is what my client sees when they're out looking at the project with me. This is what they see, but this is what they really want. If they just want this, they don't need to hire me to photograph. This is what they're expecting. They're expecting a level of perfection of the image. In the days of film, sorry to say, I would have been stuck with this. But now with digital photography, I'm not. I can create something like this for my client. But let me submit that it's more subtle than that. This is a photograph I took for Landscape Architect, actually, for a book I did for him. And I think most people would be happy with this. Let me show you everything that's not right. All these arrows point to things that really should be taken out of the image. They don't help. And Leonardo said, what doesn't help the image hurts the image. Up in the corner, the little bits of foliage that hang in. On the left-hand side, all these little white areas, these little white dots. And if you were drawing, you wouldn't do that. If you were painting, you wouldn't have those in there. And if you look, I wish I had a pointer, but if you look at this tree halfway down, just by the roof line, you can see where things are touching. And when you look, for example, back at Vermeer's work, you notice that the elements within his frame, they're either in front, behind, or separate. Rarely are they tangential. Because if you are taking the three-dimensional world and trying to translate that into 2 dimensions, when things are touching, it belies that. So all of these, if you look at the roof line of the building, the little bits of foliage on top don't help the composition. And so here's the image again. And here's with it all taken out. If you look over on the right, what happens when you take that stuff out? The sense of depth is improved. If you look over on the left, that doesn't help. And what's interesting and what's important, if you look in the upper left-hand corner, what you can do if you strive for a sense of perfection and get rid of anything that's extraneous, you can make the foliage much more sculptural. And like great bonsai masters, like great calligraphers, like tea masters, I submit, you want to strive for that level of perfection. Digital photography gives us the opportunity to sit by the side of these people. Our work can be as carefully done as their work. 17th century, this is the golden age of Dutch genre painting. Painters of architectural subjects free from the constraints of clerical patronage. The second great golden era of architectural depiction was the 18th century. Printmaking brings architectural subjects to a mass audience. And I think the third golden age is with the modern view camera, which brought a level of precision to architectural depiction on film far beyond that of 19th century field cameras. But now, with the incredible advances in camera and lens and sensor technology, and with all of the AI-based post-production software, I think now we are entering the next golden age of architectural depiction. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much, Stephen. Absolutely fascinating. Really, really enjoyed that. We're going to be back in 15 minutes. If you'd like to join us, it'll be our next presentation. So see you soon. Thank you.